In the past, we've talked a lot about controversial or shocking events that have happened in the video game community, and it's surprising to realize that so many of them ended up getting buried and forgotten about online. While I never really considered these kinds of topics to be lost media, in a way they are. There is actually a category on the wiki for real-world events, and you'd think that something like a racist Gengar illegally being distributed at a Nintendo event would be remembered forever. Curiously though, we're leaving the gaming realm today to talk about an anime-related topic which is a real oddity. Wacky and shocking real-life anime occurrences aren't really something you hear about very often because they don't really happen very often. Gaming is much more broad and appeals to wider age demographics, like Burger King toys or celebrations at Nintendo's store. Anime by comparison is much more niche and generally exists in a different way than games. Young kids getting into anime seems like a fad of the late 90s and early 2000s when Dragon Ball Z and Toonami were actively airing on Cartoon Network. Little kids who watched Powerpuff Girls and Dexter's Lab during the day were watching Yu Yu Hakusho and Dragon Ball Z only hours later. Now, I'm not trying to be a stickler here and saying that's bad. I think that's badass these kids got into anime at a young age. In fact, I did too. Naruto was my introduction to anime in the mid-2000s when it was airing on Cartoon Network, and I quickly became obsessed with it. It was violent, it was bloody, and they even made replica weapons that were sold to kids at Toys R Us. It was pretty damn cool. The only important thing to remember is that it was just a cartoon, and I never attempted to replicate anything dangerous I saw in the show. This wasn't the case for everyone though, and this is where our story begins, in the small suburb of Seattle, Washington called Everett. Early one Saturday morning in March of 2008, a few young school friends were hanging out and playing around. They were fans of Naruto, having watched the show on Cartoon Network, and since they were kids, they had the same idea to reenact scenes from the show. However, instead of just cosplaying or pretend fighting, they wanted to mimic one of the most deadly attacks from the show at that point. Gaara is a ninja who uses sand as a weapon and is constantly seen crushing enemies with it. Apparently the kids thought it would be cool to recreate this, so one of the friends volunteered to be buried in the sand. He was covered from his head to the top of his chest, in a sandbox that was 1 foot deep. These are only elementary school aged kids, so that's a lot of sand to be buried in. As expected, when you bury your face in anything, it gets difficult to breathe, so not long after he lay in the sand thrashing around trying to escape. The friends all thought he was kidding, so they laughed it off until he stopped moving. At that point, they went to get help from adults, who unearthed the child and realized he had stopped breathing. CPR was administered before he was flown to a children's hospital in critical condition. Despite these efforts, he unfortunately passed 2 days later from the suffocation he faced while being buried. The remaining kids were interviewed by the county sheriff's office, but ultimately the situation resulted in a tragic accident. While this is a really unfortunate tragedy, and it's a shame that anyone was hurt by this, there wasn't really any aftermath that ensued. The kids weren't charged, the parents weren't responsible, there wasn't a citywide ban on Naruto, nothing really happened, it was just a tragic accident. I think this is a really good viewpoint of the situation and is summed up quite well by Nadine Caslow, chief psychologist at Grady Memorial Hospital. She states, "You don't want to blame the show because millions of kids watch the show and don't take it to this limit. It's not the show's fault, it's not the kids' fault, it's not the parents' fault. That's what an accident is." This common sense can be applied to pretty much any form of mimicry from media. I'm glad they didn't put a ban on Naruto or condemn it for being too violent. Like she said, that's what an accident is. One of the more disappointing parts of this situation is the fact that the kids ended up taking away destructive habits from the show rather than productive ones. It would have been cool if this story was more about the kids using ninja powers to help someone in need, rather than burying their friend in a way that harms people in the show itself. Alas, what's done is done, and the takeaway from this story is a reminder of the damage that can be caused when kids replicate what they see on TV.